you know the story already, of course, that it was 18 months, and that was the fastest that people had been approved in Coral Gables in decades, and especially for a project of that size. And everybody was high-fiving and talking about how great it was.
So, entitlements.
All right.
Jared's taught me everything about entitlements that I know. We only go over so much in school, and then when coming down here, every municipality is somewhat different, but Jared's mastered the process, and he's going to dive into a little bit of it right now.
Yeah. So I've told you pretty loosely some of the stories of what I had gone through and our company NRI previously, and then obviously you were with me through all of the Delray process. So you saw some of it. And for me, my experience with entitlements in general, I think was a great one because I got to see a couple of projects all at the same time. And I got to see them really from start to finish through the whole process, and in a very kind of tough city. And we were doing full, like not just site plan approval like we did on Delray, but we got our height restrictions modified, and we got we got density increases, and we had architectural bonuses to get, and special public art pieces that needed to be gotten. And so we had a lot of different things going on. And so I got to see one starting through the process, very contentious, and then start the second one, which was less contentious, but running parallel within the city at some points. And so it was a big integrated process. So all cities have some structure that's similar to what we saw in Coral Gables, and the steps or the boards that we went to in Coral Gables was the DRC, which is a Development Review Committee, and then the Board of Architects, so the BOA, and then the Planning and Zoning Board, and or P&Z or PZB, different ways that people call it, and then the City Commission. And then in other places, that'll be obviously a city council or something like that. And each one of those has a different piece to it. And then you also, even before any of that, you probably have some sort of an administrative, like office staff that's going to review some of the stuff. So you have like a pre-application meeting and maybe have a little bit more process to go through. In Delray, with just our site plan approval, that was more of what we did, was just a site plan approval process and working with the city staff to make sure that everything was lined up correctly. So we can take it like one step at a time, and you can obviously stop me and ask questions, but in general, I would say that we could start with the DRC and just seeing like what it was that we went through on the administrative side of laying out the site, looking at what the current zoning is, what it was that we were requesting, what types of approvals would be needed. And then each one of those boards kind of like recommends approval to the city council eventually. Right?
Yeah. So in the Delray development, we're building as of right. So I don't think I've ever asked this, but in Coral Gables with those deals, were those as of right? Or no. Were there multiple waivers and variances?
Not even waivers and variances. Like we didn't do a zoning change, right? So technically a zoning change would be like in Miami, right? You know, the T3, T4, T5, whatever. The thing that people would say is if zoning changes, if you want to take it from a T4 to a T5, right? We weren't doing that. We were getting a site or a planned area development in Coral Gables, a PAD. And so we had an area that we were planning to have multiple different uses in a particular design way. In other cities or different municipalities, they might call it like an SAP or a special area plan. But it's generally the process of saying, we have something that we want to put here. We know what the zoning is, and we know what the future land uses are. And so we think that this plan for this area makes more sense than sticking it in a box of what the general zoning would allow.
Okay. Yeah, because in Delray, we got unanimous approval, and it still took some time, but again, we were as of right. And with some of those other holdups that you saw, what was the turnaround time when maybe you got some comments back on some of the design? And then when were you able to go back to the city and present?
Yeah, so even at the early stage, again, for any project, when you go through that pre-application, and you probably want to even do that during your early due diligence period, right?
Yeah.
So like you're under contract, and even for a standard contract where you're gonna have like 60 days, 90 days to get approved, and you don't have a long approval contingency in your contract, you wanna go have a meeting with the city and do your pre-application meeting where you have maybe a city planner, like a planning person on your staff or your team. And then you also want to have your architect or your engineer that's going to come in and show some of that with you. And so just to get their initial look through things.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, so the turnaround time with some of those things, it really depends. Like I said, all of the different processes, even with a regular due diligence period where you have like 60 or 90 days, you probably want to have a pre-application meeting where either the planning person who's on your team is going to go with you, or an architect or a land use attorney. You're going to go in and present your plan to some of the city staff, and you go through like the preliminary checklist, and you say, hey, this is our idea. What are the steps that it's going to take to get us there? And is this something that the city staff would be in favor of? Or is there something that maybe isn't in the code that the city has already started to talk about behind the scenes that might change things? So you go in and you have that meeting first. And then each subsequent meeting and actual submission, when you're really going through the process, probably a 30-day minimum turnaround time for, you submit to the city, city's got 30 days to get back to you. That's typical. Some cities, they'll take longer. Some cities have laws that require them to get back to you in a certain amount of time. And so all of these things can change. But I would say in general, every time you submit a new set of documents back to the city, you should expect it's going to be 30 days before you hear back.
Yeah. And then would you say that going back to do the second project in the same city, it was a little bit easier because you already went through the process or had started the process? So obviously it's a different site, it's a completely different design, it's a completely different project, but did it allow for you guys to move through the entitlement process a little bit more quickly?
Yeah. So just like in Delray, when we were going through the process in Coral Gables, they were very different, right? But in both cases, everyone was saying how our team had gotten through the process so much faster than anyone they had seen in years and years, right? So when I was on the call with our brokers and some of our partners today, our brokers were telling our partners how they had never seen anyone go through Delray so quickly. And the same thing was happening on our first project in Coral Gables, was everybody was saying, oh, I don't know how you made it through so quickly. And you know the story already, of course, that it was 18 months, and that was the fastest that people had been approved in Coral Gables in decades, right? Yeah. And especially for a project of that size. And everybody was high-fiving and talking about how great it was, even though we had gone through some boards and gotten held up and deferred, and we had pulled our thing off of the board meeting to go back and make revisions. And this is just kind of the political reality of the situation. And like I was saying, our second project, we were going through and having a similar situation where we knew, to your point about the second one in the same city, we knew some of the processes. And so from a personal knowledge standpoint, it's definitely easier because you understand what's going on, you know what steps you're going to go through, you know all of the things that your land use attorney or whoever is guiding you through that process. They didn't have to retell you what the next step is. And especially if you're seeking the same types of approvals. We had legal technicalities that made one project different than the other, where it wasn't just a planned area development for both with all the same kind of bells and whistles of the legal technicalities. And honestly, I don't remember 9 years ago exactly what all of those things were, but there were slight differences in the way that it was set up. But all of our relationships were obviously transferable. Most of the people who were working in the city for one were still working in the city for the other. Maybe even some of the people that I was working more directly with on a day-to-day basis with the city review staff had gotten a promotion. And so it made it even better, because now instead of that person going up to a director level and saying, oh, I've looked at this project, I know everything checks out, they had worked with us through some of those things and they knew that everything checked out. So yeah, it definitely makes it easier when you have a second one in the same city. But there's also, you can do things to make things go faster on your first time through if you plan correctly.
Yeah, if you do the proper due diligence, know the code, which you taught me with the Delray one, and that's why we studied it in detail beforehand.
And hire the right team. Right?
Yeah.
If you spend the time to pick the right team that knows who all those staff members are, they know all the rules are, it's just kind of night and day difference. And even though in Coral Gables we did that same thing, we were just seeking so much bigger approval processes.